In the ancient world, many cultures told stories about a monster of death that lurks in the deep, dark sea.
I guess I just want to make the case that there are dragons all over the Bible. There be dragons.
They be dragons.
All over.
When it comes to the world of the powers of darkness, there are certain things that are just on the table. There is disorder or chaos. Those things are 180 degrees removed from the world God created for the human family that he wanted. Leviathan was a very familiar symbol in the ancient world, not just in Israel and Canaan, but just broadly. This great dragon of the sea as being a metaphor for chaos. Ultimately, the ones driving the bus aren't necessarily the human power brokers, because behind the human power brokers, there's a more sinister intelligence that wants to destroy, that wants to enslave, that wants you to worship them. This is why the nations, both in Psalm 82, Revelation, and lots of other passages. I mean, there's tons of passages like this in the Old Testament. This is why the nations are described this way, and why the gods of those nations get looped into it. It's all one huge chaotic evil system.
On the first page of the Bible, God brings order by separating the dry land from the chaotic sea, and there he contains the sea dragon. And this monster is connected to that dragon-like snake that confronts Adam and Eve in the garden. A spiritual being using the power of chaos and death to lure humans into their own self-destruction. Biblical authors also use dragon imagery to describe violent human kings, like Pharaoh, who enslaved and murdered the ancient Israelites. Even the famous Goliath, the details of his armor and weapons depict him as a scaly, snaky giant.
So the sea dragon is loose in all these forms, but it can be defeated.
Yes, but be careful, because the power of the dragon is strangely appealing. A dragon slayer can be enticed to use the dragon's power.
And so become a dragon themselves.
Right.
There's kind of three different ways into thinking about the same idea. And we can think about them as like the three realms, the three chaos realms. The dark abyss in Genesis 1, and then you've got the Tanin, the sea dragon.
That lives in the chaos waters.
Okay.
Yep.
Then you've got the dry wilderness of Genesis 2, which is also a way to think of the same idea of just nothingness, no creation, no life. And the creature there is the snake.
The snake, yep. Also, because it goes into holes in the ground, it's kind of associated with the underworld in the realm of the dead.
All right.
That should not be forgotten.
So they feel like completely opposite images. There's some connections. They're reptilian kind of animals.
Yeah.
But they're two different domains. And then those two ways into it really get blurred to the point where, like, sometimes you're talking about a snake, but then it's referred to as a sea dragon.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're talking about a sea dragon, then it's referred to as a snake.
Yeah.
And so there's that. Then there's a third realm, which we talked about at length.
Yeah.
Which is the darkness.
The darkness, yes.
And that is another way, a third way to think about nothingness.
Yeah.
And God orders the darkness by saying, let there be light. And then he puts creatures, the host of heaven in the sky, the great light for the day, the lesser light for the night, and also the stars. And the stars are these creatures of the night. And then, so now when we talk about the creature showing up, it could be a snake, but it could also then be this creature of the sky in some way too.
Yeah. And all of those can be depicted as good or bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
When's a snake ever depicted as good?
Oh, good point.
Oh, well, the Tanin can praise God and can be used by Moses.
Yep. Or in Isaiah's poetry, he can envision the new creation
Where they're harmless.
as an era of peace between humans and snakes.
And the toddler is playing with the cobra.
That's right.
Yeah.
Three realms.
Three realms,
three different
creatures. But then it just all gets kind of just blended in a way that...
Yes, that's right.
I think I just want to maybe understand, like...
Yeah.
So if they can all be... Okay, here's the question. If it gets blended together, then it makes me think, oh, okay, well, these are 3 ways to talk about some other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I wonder, what is that thing? What is that
Yeah.
rudimentary thing that these are 3 ways in to think about, like a creature in the domain of nothingness who then decides, I'm going to drag creation back into nothing. Like, what are we talking about?
What are we talking about? Let me just clear the waters with mud, perhaps. So just want you to notice, you identified those 3 realms: the sky, the dark, and then the sky rulers, the chaos waters, and the dragon, and then the desolate wilderness, and then the snake. So what I'm trying to do also is do a reverse genealogy, often, from later books in the Bible or Second Temple Jewish literature for how did they get
to the imagery they're
to
using.
the imagery they're using.
Yeah.
So one place where we'll end our last conversation here is the scene in Revelation chapter 12, where John sees a sign in the heavens of a huge, great red dragon on fire with 7 heads, 10 horns, and then on the 7 heads are 7 like crowns. His tail sweeps away a third of the stars, sweeps them to the earth. Then he's going to go stand in front of this woman who John saw earlier, and she's about to give birth to a male seed who's going to rule the nations, and he wants to eat it. But then she escapes, the child is snatched away, and she dwells in the wilderness for 3.5 years. And then there's a war in the skies, and the dragon is now up there with his stars, called angels now, fighting. You guys get the imagery here. Well, I don't know if you get the imagery. Sorry. And then the dragon's thrown down to the land, who is the ancient serpent called the slanderer, the diabolos, or the opposer, the Satan, and he deceives the whole world. So let's just stop. Like, how do you make sense of this? And so I'm trying to do like that reverse engineering. And all of the imagery is right there in the first chapters of Genesis.
I see.
But here they're all being brought together as referring to something.
Yes. And what is that thing? And I think when I read this, and maybe from just my background, I think that thing is spiritual darkness. What we're talking about is, or what we've called before, spiritual evil. What are we talking about in the when we did the Satan and demons stuff? Like, we just started calling it.
Yeah, they're creatures. They are creatures of the divine realm that, like humans, have.
Are these the demons that Jesus encounters too? Like, is this the?
Yes. I mean, they're certainly related. Where those come from, there's kind of multiple explanations in ancient Judaism, all of them with roots in the Bible. But they have different kinds of bodies because they're heavenly bodies. So they have fundamentally different types of bodies than we do.
When you say heavenly bodies, they are, when you say body too, you just mean physically made up in a way that's different than us.
Yeah, they have bodies. And the biblical authors actually think that those bodies are more...
So when we say spiritual, we don't mean disembodied.
No, what I mean is their bodies, this is the biblical language for they exist, they're real. There's a whole other realm, and the biblical authors just take this for granted.
Yes, okay, what is the thing we're taking for granted here?
It's a realm of intelligent beings who image God in a way that's different than you and I image God here on the land. And they have bodies, but their bodies are of a fundamentally different mode than our animal-like bodies here on the land.
Okay.
And they actually take for granted that that realm is actually more substantial and real than you and I are here living outside of Eden. We're the ones living in the shadow realm for the biblical authors. We're like in the sub-reality.
We're in the simulation.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And angelic or spiritual beings are a step closer to ultimate reality.
Interesting. Okay.
However, because they're beings, again, biblical authors take for granted, because they're beings that image God in terms of God's in mind, they have intelligence, will, and volition, and degree of independence. And they can choose folly and rebellion against the wisdom of God just like we can. And I think that's what is being described in Genesis chapter 3, the twin fall of powers in heaven and earth. And that's certainly how Jesus and the apostles viewed reality and viewed the biblical story.
So over the past 3 months, we've talked about this. Our channel has been slowly going through an epic series tracing the theme of the chaos dragon from Genesis all the way to Revelation. We've really taken a slow, methodical approach to understanding this theme. It's been very formative for my journey and for me and my audience. And I was really, what really took a turn for me is an episode that I was listening to Tim Mackey on the Bible Project podcast. Can't recommend it enough. And he recommended your book, Piercing Leviathan. And I was just like, when I got that, a lot of things clicked for me. So your book centers in on exploring the chaos themes of Leviathan and Behemoth represented in the book of Job. So you actually feature the biblical theme of chaos in some of your other sci-fi writings as well. So before we talk about those, which I want to, open us up with some introductory remarks on how the biblical concepts of Leviathan and chaos overlap in the minds of the authors and audience of Scripture.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm very glad that's a great question. Very glad to see the unseen realm prominently displayed behind you. I think Heiser was getting at something very, very important. I think like you, part of the reason I find this so fascinating is the Bible is complicating how I look at the world. And it's showing me that God's world is more complex and there are many more factors and personalities, some of them at war, than I would be tempted to believe. I'm fascinated by Leviathan and Job and elsewhere in the Old Testament because it helps without that, I would believe in demons and the spiritual world and whatnot, but it would be a pretty theoretical belief.
Yeah.
I would almost be atheistic, or atheistic isn't the right word, but almost believe in the watchmaker God, where in the sense that like it just doesn't, impinge on real everyday life.
Yeah.
They're just theories. And in the most interesting way, God is revealing that something has gone wrong with his creation, that there are powers and principalities that can only be talked about metaphorically and symbolically. Metaphorically, maybe not the right word, but symbolically, that God has got this entirely under his control, and yet there is a huge battle raging in creation. And especially in the book of Job, he's also saying the fact that battle is going on does not mean that creation is a horrible place or it's not worth living or God doesn't care about his world. So have you read Paul Hebert's article, The Flaw of the Excluded Middle?
No, I haven't.
If you Google it, you can get a PDF. It's like maybe 9 pages long. It's written in the 80s. I've never forgotten reading that. He talks about how most Westerners tend to think of like empirical physical reality and ultimate reality, God's throne room. Most Westerners, that's our cosmology. And he says most other people groups will have will have 3 categories: ultimate reality, everyday, empirical reality, and a kind of mid-level spiritual realm with a lot of different, gods and ghosts and demons. And even though the Bible really pushes back against paganism and witchcraft and all those things, the Bible's cosmology, I think, is basically the same. It's just reordering it to show, an ultimate God whom no one can challenge. And he goes on to say in that article that Western missionaries have been a secularizing force in other parts of the world because they have a kind of, very long answer, I apologize. They have a kind of Enlightenment, secular, materialist view of the world. They just put God up at the top.
Yeah.
So secularism and atheism has become more thinkable in Africa under the influence of Western missionaries. So all that is to say, the Bible's complicating my picture of God's world in the most fascinating way.
Yeah, and chaos and disorder does that, and I love that answer, and I think that's it's important to see how getting those elements right helps us understand where we're at within the narrative, what's out there, and it's like you said, N.T. Wright says it all the time, we don't have good language. They didn't have it back in the ancients. We don't even have it now to describe these things because they're the indescribable.
Here we are.
Hey, here we are talking about dragons.
Dragons in the Bible.
Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of misleading, is it? Like last time what you really showed us was there's a lot of creatures in the Bible that you could translate some of them with the word dragon.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's more of a theme of like chaos creatures.
Yeah, dangerous chaos creatures of the sea and of the wilderness. And there's lots of a variety of types of these animals that are connected in terms of what they mean.
Uh-huh.
So lions, are dark predatory creatures of the wilderness that hunt at night. And so we're crocodiles or something like that. But the one creature that has a word used to describe both the sea monster and the wilderness monster is the word nachash in Hebrew, which means snake or serpent.
Uh-huh.
And then there's a big vocabulary of what the water version of that creature is.
The Leviathan.
And the Tanin.
The Tanin.
Which monstrous reptilian sea creatures.
Yeah. Okay.
With multiple heads, as we'll see today. Yeah.
Cool.
So the reason why we're talking about this is it's actually a major repeated theme throughout the storyline of the Bible, starting with page 1, depending on the translation you read, but it's there in Hebrew on day 5 of creation. And all throughout, imagery of snakes and dragons and monsters is used throughout the biblical story as an image for, well, it's part of what we'll talk about right now in this conversation. And then the story of the Bible culminates with the victory over the dragon in the Revelation. So what we're going to look at is the dragon combat myth in ancient Near Eastern culture and literature. And there, the monster is primarily a sea dragon.
Okay.
What the biblical authors do, and this is what we'll do in all the episodes to follow, is take up that cultural symbolism that's very common in their day, and they tweak it and develop it and do interesting things with it. And that's where you get the variety of monster creatures that are all associated.
Okay.
But where it all started was an ancient cross-cultural mythology about the storm god fighting the sea dragon. So in the ancient Near East, and actually, as we're going to see beyond the ancient Near East, there is a really widespread symbolic narrative told across cultures that preceded the Israelites and surrounded them. And it all has the same basic plot line with the same characters. Here's the basic summary. You can go back to the oldest roots of Indian culture in Hindu religious texts.
How old are we talking?
Well, the textual versions are dated to somewhere around, I have it here in the notes, likely an oral formation period from 1900 BC through 1000 BC.
Okay.
It's a long 900-year formation history, but Abraham's cruising the promised land maybe around 1700 BC. So this is predating his migration.
These stories would have been around before.
Yep, around before. There's an ancient Hittite version that comes from around the period when Abraham and his descendants are cruising around, from the Old Kingdom period of the Hittites, around 1700 BC. There is a version of this story told by the Hurrians, which is a really unique people group, at least their languages, because it's not Indo-European or Semitic language. It's really interesting.
I'm not familiar with this crew.
Yeah, the Hurrians. But around 1500 BC, they're kind of way up in the north of Turkey. Then you have Ugarit, the ancient city of Ugarit, which it's a coastal archaeology site in Lebanon, on the coast of Lebanon. And they're around the time of Joshua and the Judges, around 1500 to 1200 BC. They have a really elaborate version of this story. And then we get to Assyria and Babylon, so Mesopotamia, and theirs is from around the same period, 1500s. So it's kind of like if you look at a pond and you can see that there's a ripple going out, you presume there's a stone.
Oh, right.
And you can kind of angle from where the ripples are back to where the center was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea of how the story spread. Is it's in all these cultures around this time period, 1900 to 1500. And so most certainly its roots go back even to the prehistoric period where all these cultures descended from.
Prehistoric meanings before any written
records.
language.
Yeah, that's right. So
we're right on the brink.
Yeah.
In the 1900 BC, right?
Yeah, well, for the alphabet.
For the alphabet.
So the hieroglyphics
Oh, okay.
and the Sumerian.
That's been around for 1,000 years.
That's been around, yeah, for a much longer period. But in terms of an oral story about the storm god facing down the sea dragon, it must have lived on orally for a much longer period to have all these descendants in these very different languages and cultures.
Okay.
Because here's the basic outline of the story.
Okay.
There's a sea dragon with its minions. And
What does it usually look like?
oh, I'll show you lots of pictures. There's lots of pictures of it. Actually, here, do you just want to do that now?
I mean, yeah, I kind of want one in my head.
Okay, got it. All right. So this is the work of Medad Ritchie that I just mentioned. She's brought together really what is the most comprehensive now collection of depictions of the sea dragon. So here's one from the late Assyrian period, and it's of the storm god carrying a bunch of lightning bolts in his hand. So really what it looks like is a long snake
Yeah.
with crisscross scales, but it has horns.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. And he's
And little feet? Is that little feet?
Oh, yeah, right. Yep. Two little tiny hands.
Little tiny
Claws.
hands.
Yeah, whatever. Here is an Akkadian cylinder seal. It's also Mesopotamian. So you've got a deity with a long spear who has horns on its head, and it is piercing one of the many heads,
7 heads.
7 of them, of this 7-headed monster with 4 legs and huge spikes coming out of its back. And then there's a deity on the back kind of holding onto its tail so that the other deity can spear its head.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Here's one from much later. This is from Greek, like a Greek vase that dates from around 600 BC. And here it's actually reflecting a Greek mythology went down into Greek culture. So Heracles and Iolaus both bashing the many heads of like a hydra.
That's what it's called in Greek mythology, a hydra?
The hydra. Yeah. And hudor is the word water in Greek.
Oh.
So the water monster.
Yeah.
Hydra.
And that one looks like,
Looks like a bunch of snakes coiled together as like one snake.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's one that's interesting. This is Mesopotamian from a temple in a town called Nimrud from around 870 BC. And here, so you have a god Ninurta, but he looks exactly like how like the king of Assyria would dress.
Uh-huh.
He's got lightning bolts in his hand. And what he's facing off with, you tell me what that thing looks like.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it looks kind of like, oh, my gosh. This is like every animal.
Totally.
So its legs, let's start with the legs. They look like ostrich legs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And then it starts to become scaly, and you get this scaly body
Mm-hmm.
that like turns into this
Mm-hmm.
crazy head.
Yep.
Kind of like what maybe like a lion would look like
Yeah.
if it didn't have any fur.
Yep. No mane, but it has horns.
And then horns and just crazy fangs.
Yep.
It looks almost demonic.
Yeah. And then it has wings,
And it has wings.
eagle wings.
And then it's standing up on, I guess I
Yes.
call it ostrich legs because it's like,
Yeah.
it looks like it's standing up like a bird would, but
Mhm.
then its hands are not bird-like. It's like almost like lion hands.
Yeah. 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 So this is going to be important when we eventually get to Daniel chapter 7,
Okay.
which is describing monsters that sound like what this thing looks like.
This is really high fidelity. Is this like a recreation of it or?
Let's see. Yeah, this is etched in a rock. So yeah, this is like a shaded version
Okay.
with high contrast.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is, so this is, again, if you were to Google like Nimrod or Ninurta battling the monster, Google will give you this image. This is a famous image. The posture of the storm god is the same as the posture of the first picture I showed you, which is from a little cylinder seal. So these are little tiny like clay seals that are in a circle. They're called cylinders. And they have a little drawing etched on all the sides. And you would roll it on clay out, and you would use it to make a decorative mark on a piece of clay or something like that. There are hundreds and hundreds of these that have surfaced. So part of Medad Ritchie's dissertation was to say that most people in the ancient world would have not read the versions of the story that I'm going to tell you about.
They would have heard the story,
And seen pictures.
but more, they would just know it by seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Seeing it on letters,
Wow.
seeing it on temples, seeing it like what billboards
This is their
essentially
media.
for us. Yeah, yeah. So this was one of the iconic, popular tales
Wow.
of the ancient Eastern world. Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about.
In fact, entire empires can become like dragons. During Israel's exile in Babylon, the prophet Daniel has a dream about 4 monstrous beasts rising up out of the sea.
Whoa. Mutant dragons?
They represent violent kingdoms in league with dark spiritual powers. But then, a new character appears, rising up from the land to sit beside God's throne. And as the dream ends, Daniel sees those monsters destroyed.
So who is this dragon slayer?
So to that point, let's talk about the understanding of biblical myth. Most modern evangelicals become quite unhinged if you use the word myth or fiction in the same sentence of the Bible. We recently interviewed hailed Hebrew Bible translator Dr. Robert Alter, and he helped myself and our audience explore how the original authors and audience utilized the literary tool of myth and fiction to display historical truth. So in the introduction to your book, you say, any division between myth and history is a modern idea that would have been foreign to ancient writers. But just such a division used to be common in biblical studies, such that the literature of the ancient Near East was placed firmly in the category of myth and the Old Testament described in contrast as history. I love how you have that quote and you focus on how you set out at the understanding as a foundation of understanding this at a foundation of your books, like at the very beginning. And that's why I thought it was so important. So help us explore this important principle a bit more and tell us how the Hebrew Bible and ultimately the book of Job utilize myth to tell truth.
Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, to be explicitly clear, the Bible's not fiction. On every page, it shows a commitment to historical truth and historical accuracy. Second, the word myth we just don't have a better word in English. It's dangerous because on the one hand, a myth means something silly or childish or obviously false. I'm not saying that about the Bible. However, if you get into like literary studies, and there's a whole subgenre of scholarship on myth theory, why do so many ancient societies, and why was it so entrenched in the ancient Middle East to have these big symbolic narratives about order and chaos and how the world was, and so on? And if you really get into what's the right word? Fleshed out and well thought out theories of myth. People in the ancient Middle East did not think I'm not saying this very well. They used myth to talk about reality and truth and even historical truth.
Yes.
So in Sennacherib's, you remember Sennacherib from Isaiah 36 and 37, he invades Jerusalem. In his Akkadian account, I don't read Akkadian, but a friend of mine who does said that there's an echo to the Babylonian mythological text Enuma Elish about the defeat of chaos. That a historical text that has a lot of accurate historical stuff is using myth as a framework for making sense out of things.
Yeah.
And in the same way, I think if you give me my qualified definition of what a myth is, that it's talking about realities that we can, big realities of order and chaos that we can only talk about symbolically. We can't fully comprehend and grasp them. They're just beyond us. Then it's fair to say the Bible is mythic in the best sense of the word.
Yeah.
In that it is deeply true in multiple ways. True in the strongest sense of the word true. Let me stop there. More is coming to mind, but you talk for a while.
So I know what you're saying is right. And it's important for us to take the Bible on its own terms, because that's how we get the intended truth from it, because it is trying to give us accurate historical foundational truth about who God is, what's going on in the world, and all these things. But as we just talked about with Leviathan and some of these other Babylonian narratives that get kind of woven in even through the Psalms, that they can utilize these freely. And for a while inside, this was part of your quote that I liked, for a while inside scholarship, it was like we we wanted to hold them separate for some reason. And we're I think returning back to understanding the beauty and art of biblical poetry and narrative and how they implemented all these things. So I'm glad that you brought it out of the foundation. Go ahead.
Modernity tends to separate what ancient peoples would combine.
Yeah.
It like reason versus faith, right? Or myth versus history or something like that. If I say the Bible is mythic, I'm saying it is true in the deepest, realist, hardest sense of the word true. And that if we had the eyes to see, we would see how beautiful and complex and sometimes terrifying and four-dimensional reality is and spiritual reality is. And myth is the best word we have in English to try to grasp that. It's just kind of an ambiguous one. And to me, that makes the Bible fascinating. I mean, I love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it's fiction, and it's intended as fiction. Everyone knows it is. But what if you had that wonderfully sweet, like tingling sense on the back of your neck of things too deep to put into words, but it was completely historically true, and every word is inspired, and so on. That's the best of all possible worlds. It just makes the Bible thrilling, I think.
Let's get into the abstract stuff. With that bit of an introduction, you have several things in the passage that sort of scream to scholars. Again, this symbolic, mythopoetic sort of context for what's going on here. Number one, you have the proximity of this material to Ezekiel 28. Okay, here we are right in the next chapter. And you had plenty of, again, cosmic references, various, divine stories from Canaan and a few other parts too. But you have a very, very clear mythopoetic bent in Ezekiel 28 that says, hey, we're talking about a historical figure here, but lurking in the background are these religious theological things that have to do with the divine council and cosmic rebellion and all this stuff. So you have here chapter 29 right on the heels of that. And we've seen this at other places in the book of Ezekiel. But that's one thing that leads scholars to think, okay, we're just getting more of the same. It's just that now it's directed against Egypt. Before it was the Prince of Tyre, now it's against Egypt. You also have following chapters 31 and 32, which when we get there, it's going to be abundantly clear that there's something going on there in this, again, kind of mythopoetic, cosmic worldview sort of thing. So the fact that here you have chapter 29 right between those two things, again, scholars are thinking, well, the context argues for this. Secondly, the word tanim, again, the lemma tanin is important. We'll see in a moment why, because I'm going to take you to some other passages. The line about the hook in the jaw is important because that's going to show up in other passages where the great dragon, Leviathan, who is called Tanin, is going to be discussed. And Leviathan is perhaps the most well-known chaos symbol in antiquity. And then fourth, the notion of being cast into the wilderness to be given as food for land-dwelling animals and birds is another thing that pops up in episodes or passages where Leviathan is discussed. When Leviathan is judged, he is handed over again to the other beasts to, so they can pick its carcass, that kind of thing. So those four observations, when scholars read these first 5 verses, again, just scream to them, okay, we're going to have some sort of mythopoetic context here, some sort of wider abstract religious worldview at work in this passage. It's not just about, hey, there's a crocodile that we're just going to take that big beast and we're going to sort of analogize Pharaoh to that thing. It's more than zoology here. So let's talk about Tanim, and of course the lemma is Tanin with an N. It appears in Deuteronomy 32:33, for instance, and I'll just read it to you. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of asps. Okay, if you cut out to that passage, the word there for serpents there is tanim. Okay, tananim in that case. But here you have a parallel. Now notice the parallel. You have this word for dragon in parallel with another word clearly for serpent. In that case, it's going to be the asp, which is a different term than nakash. In this case, it's peten is the lemma. Again, a common word for a serpent, an asp, a type of snake in the Bible. But you have, again, the dragon in parallel with this, this particular snake. So it could be, and again, it often is, that dragon here would have been conceived by the ancient person as a serpent-like creature. The serpentine idea is clear from the encounter with the Egyptian magicians. Remember, Moses and Aaron goes in before Pharaoh. They go in there and they confront Pharaoh in Exodus 7, verses 9 and following. Well, if we read verse 9, it says, God tells Moses, when Pharaoh says to you, prove yourselves by working a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent. Okay, believe it or not, that's Tanin right there. Same thing for verse 12, same chapter. Again, the confrontation with Pharaoh. So again, this term, this dragon term, which everybody says, oh, that's a crocodile because it lives in the Nile. Well, okay, it could be, it might be, because there's not just one description of the great sea creature that is the symbol of chaos, the symbol of hostility to Yahweh's good order. Okay, there's no one way of telegraphing that. But in some of these, there is a very distinct, again, serpentine flavor to the context. And I'm harping on this for a specific reason that I'll mention in a bit. Tanim is also used of saltwater creatures, Job 7:12. So it's not always, fresh water. We read here, am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me? Job 7:12, sea monster there in the ESV is Tanim. Now, I'm going to go to Isaiah 51:9, where I think the most significant connection here is made, because this is going to help us go to a couple other passages. But in Isaiah 51:9, again, we're talking about this dragon motif. Again, what people in the ancient world would have thought when they either hear preached or they read in a text Tanim. Again, they're going to be thinking some very specific things that relate to just why the world is the way it is. Why is it chaotic? Why is there upheaval? Why is there disorder? Surely God wouldn't make the world this way on purpose. Okay, well, there are forces at work against the way things God wants it to be. And that's where you get the concept of chaos. So in Isaiah 51:9, we read this. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahav in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Now again, note the parallel there. Dragon, Tanim, is in parallel to Rahav. Okay, verse 10. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? Obviously, that's a reference to the Exodus, crossing over the great deep. Well, the great deep here is where the dragon lived. It's where Rahav lived. And in Isaiah 51, God is judging Rahav. He's judging the dragon by drying up the sea, okay? Now, if you take that back, to Ezekiel 29, again, we have the dragon in the Nile, and God says in verse 5, I will cast you out into the wilderness, and you and all the fish of your stream, I'm going to empty that thing out. You're going to be, essentially put on dry land. The beasts of the earth and the birds of the heavens are going to pick your carcass, that sort of thing. So keep all these things in mind. Let's go to Isaiah 30, verse 17. Egypt's help is worthless and empty. Therefore I have called her Rahav, who sits still. Again, Rahav, the same word as in Isaiah 51, where it's paralleled with this, with the dragon. Again, part of the matrix of terms that speak of chaos. Well, what's the point of, God sort of making fun of Egypt here by calling her Rahav, who sits still? Well, basically because you don't have the power to do anything. You're not a threat. Okay, you might as well just, sit on your butt over there in the corner, because, you're not doing anything. You're sort of feckless or useless. Again, you're impotent is the idea. You're not active. Okay, you're not, a force to be reckoned with. Let's go to Psalm 89. This is a divine council passage. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings, the B'nai Elim, is like the Lord, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him? O Lord, God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you? You could also translate that, your faithful ones all around you, in a council reference. You rule the raging of the sea. In other words, you are greater than the powers of chaos. The sea and the creatures, of course, living in it, like this great sea monster dragon, super sea serpent kind of thing. Okay, those were symbols of something not under control. Why? Because the sea was unmanageable. It was unpredictable. It was threatening. Okay, but the Lord, God, is stronger than the sea. He is the one who calms the waters. He is the one in control of them. He is the one who puts the sea under restraint in the creation narratives. So verse 9 again, Psalm 89. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. You crushed Rahab like a carcass. You scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. The heavens are yours. The earth also is yours. The world and all that is in it, you have founded them. The north and the south, you have created them. Tabor and Hermon joyously praise your name. You have a mighty arm, strong is your hand, high your right hand. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. And here you have a reference to the God of the council, Yahweh, the Lord of the council, subduing, crushing, bringing, into restraint. Rahab, again, the great sea beast, the forces of chaos. He stills the seas, he stills the waves, and he crushes Rahab like a carcass. Psalm 74, yet God my King is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters. There's our word Tanin, on the waters. Because you broke the heads of the sea monsters, the Tanin on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. Okay, right there it is. The same kind of language that we see right here in Ezekiel 29, where God is judging, God is crushing, God is destroying. There's a number of words here. God is, again, overpowering the Tanin. He is overpowering Leviathan. He is mightier than the forces who work against him. Again, and the way this is portrayed in biblical thinking is the raging sea. This is the primary metaphor for all of the forces that frighten us, threaten us, oppose the order that God imposed in creation. Okay, when there are problems, it's viewed as sort of an eruption of the forces, of nature. And again, this is why, when you had natural disaster, when you had things like this, it was viewed as in cosmic terms, that this is just symptomatic of the fact. Now catch this. This is symptomatic of the fact, all this bad stuff that happens, again, either in the natural world, natural disasters, or we are reminded of by the threat, by the fearsomeness of the world we live in. It just reminds us that our world is not Eden. Our world is not the way God originally wanted it to be.
We need your help. Ring Them Bells is a non-profit organization where every dollar donated goes right back into the mission of spreading the good news and helping those in need. The main ministry of Ring Them Bells is serving those in need in the name of our King Jesus. Over the past year, we have fed over 2,000 meals, and next year, we want to double that. We can't do this without your support. Everything we create here and all of the food that we serve is free because it's paid for by generous viewers just like you. If you feel led to donate and join the mission with us here at Ring Them Bells, click the Give Butter link in the notes and comments of this video. If you can't support us financially, please continue to like and share the content, as this helps us so much with spreading the good news about what Jesus has done for our world.
Now we're going to move into a scroll called Job.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Before we do that,
Sure.
So fundamental to the biblical story, though, is that God plants within creation an outpost of garden order and the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And he installs heavenly and earthly rulers as his partners in the creation project to
continue to subdue.
Turn that
chaos.
outpost into something that spreads and fills all creation.
Mm-hmm.
But through the agency and decisions and wisdom and rulership of the creatures themselves, trusting God's wisdom.
Yeah.
But when they choose to do what's good in their own eyes, they end up undoing God's good order, and so become agents of that dragon chaos.
Mm.
And so then both heavenly rulers in rebellion against God and earthly human rulers in rebellion against God can be described with the symbolism of the dragon.
Mm.
So that's kind of the big framework for where we're going.
Right. And that makes it complicated that when the Bible's talking about the dragon, what's it talking about? Is it talking about simply that there's disorder in the world that God wants to order and wants us to partake with him in ordering? Or is it talking about the rebellion of God's image bearers working to create violence and disorder? So is it talking merely about the creatures and the sea and the wilderness and expanding the garden? Or is it talking about like Babylon coming to destroy us? And I guess I'm wondering in the case of Job, because we're going to meet the dragon here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Job is a story about a man who
Yeah.
suffers greatly and wants to know what's going on. Why am I suffering?
Yeah.
So he's experiencing chaos in his life.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, the book of Job is going to be an exploration about what it looks like to live as one of those human image of God rulers on the land. And then when, as a human ruler, you've been living by God's word and wisdom, right? And in the fear of the Lord. And in theory, if you do that, it should just be Garden of Eden for you. You're just working the garden with God. But then what happens if you live in a creation that's on its way to the full garden ideal, but there's still wilderness out there and oceans with dragons and dangerous things? What happens when the chaos dragon strikes our life in the form of, for Job, it takes a lightning strike, in the form of bandits and raiders who come steal and kill and destroy, and then of a huge storm that knocks a house over that his kids are in, and they all die. What's that about? How is the image of God supposed to process that? And so that's what happens to Job. But that's not just what the story is about. What we are given is a picture of what's happening up in the divine council in the skies between God and some of the host of heaven. So this is how it works. One day, chapter 1, verse 6, the sons of Elohim, spiritual beings, were standing before the Lord, and the opposer, the one opposed, also came with them. It's the Hebrew word, the Satan. Gets translated as a proper name in all of our English translations, which is, I guess, fine, but it doesn't help us really understand what's going on.
Doesn't sound like you think it's fine.
I guess not. Yeah. It's not a proper name. You don't put the word "the" on the beginning of a proper name.
And I think that is a incredible segue to the central thesis of your book, because in the introduction you say, and why do Behemoth and Leviathan take up so much space in the second speech? So we're talking about the second speeches of God to Job in the book of Job, where he brings up Behemoth and Leviathan, and you say they take up so much room. If these two creatures are as commonly understood as a hippopotamus and crocodile, in what possible sense is that a satisfying answer to Job? If I complain that I'm suffering and unjustly wronged, is it okay to answer, can you make a hippopotamus? No. It's also confusing that Yahweh says almost nothing directly about himself in chapter 38 through 41, but Job responds by claiming better insight, not into Behemoth and Leviathan, but into God himself. So what inferences has Job drawn from the complex poetry of chapters 38 through 41 that prompt such a change? So again, just to better ask that question, we see in the second speech of God to Job that he references Behemoth and Leviathan. And so many just kind of explain this way in different ways. But what your central thesis of your book says is that inside that proclamation from God. It's not a throwaway couple chapters. There's actually some meat there of hope that God's giving to us. So help my audience understand that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to stay calm as I talk about this. I don't know why this bugs me so much. There's a lot more importance. I could be getting really exercised over the theology of marriage, which is very contested right now, or something like that. I don't know why, but I'm shocked. I see, here I go. I'm shocked, genuinely surprised by how many really smart Bible scholars who have a lot of good things to say about Job just say hippopotamus and crocodile. And it bugs me because it's that simplistic two-tiered cosmology I was talking about earlier, where there's eternal reality, empirical reality. Behemoth and Leviathan are clearly not God. So it's just, well, what animal species is it? And I'm trying to read Job in terms of a three-tiered, like the mid-level spirituality, and say, this is the Bible's way of talking about powers and principalities, dark spiritual forces that rebel against God. That is such a helpful answer to Job, because as far as Job knows, it was just him and God. Job's just walking along one day, friends with God, minding his own business, and God drives a train through his life. So Job is trying to understand this, and he's going to try to explain it in reference to himself and fail. He'll say at the end of chapter 7, if I did something to make God mad, like, he's forgiven me in the past, why wouldn't he forgive me now? And if I did sin in some way, is that such a threat to God he has to kill my 10 children? So he says, no, I am not the problem here. And he starts to draw new conclusions about God's character. And he essentially says, God is not a good person. He's not the person I thought he was. I'm not safe around him. So when God shows up and talks about Behemoth and Leviathan, he is complicating Job's worldview. He's saying, Job, you thought either I was mad at you or you were mad at me. You thought let me back up. Job has been saying either I'm the monster that God is punishing or God is a monster. And Job will talk that way. And God is saying, listen, I'm not your enemy. You're not my enemy. Let me show you our mutual enemy. That suffering came from him, not from me. So in talking about Leviathan, God is giving Job a picture of the world where unexplained suffering can happen. And God is not angry at Job. Job did nothing to deserve it. And God is still a good person. All three of those things can be true in the same universe. And Job just didn't, because he doesn't know about chapter 1, he didn't have a way to have all those three things be true, and it drove him crazy because he really loves God. Is that tracking, Jason?
No, that's tracking, and I think it makes a ton of sense. And it's where taking the Bible and its ancient Near Eastern context is so important. If we talk to the original authors and audience, they're not going to be thinking crocodile or or hippopotamus. They have these themes in mind, and it's why the thesis of my channel is helping people recover the supernatural framework of the Bible. And the word supernatural, some people hate it, but listen, it's the best word I got for it. It's helping us reclaim that wonder and original intent that was put there to see that. Like, that's what I'm saying. There's so many of these Easter eggs, like through your book that I found and through other people's writings, that when you get connected with the ancient Near Eastern context that the Bible was written in, that you find these things that we normally just overlook and throw away are like vitally important to understanding the actual storyline and who God is. And
trusting him.
And trusting him, exactly. And trusting
a God who is glorious in warfare.
Yeah.
For whom the mountains shake. It's easier to trust a God like that, even when he doesn't explain himself.
Amen.
This whole section, again, these parts of the oracles against the nations are casting the nations as forces of chaos. It's linking the nations back to the original time of chaos, back in the garden. Again, when all that was right was disrupted, when it all just gets blown up, okay? It's casting the rebellion, the disobedience, the antipathy of the nations against God's people and against Yahweh himself. It's casting all of that in the same light. And therefore, this material needs to be read, okay, against this common backdrop. Now, let's go back to Ezekiel 29. I want to say a few more things about this, again, just to give you a flavor for it. I want to read just a little section here from the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery about the sea. And again, about the dragon again, and then we'll move on to some other things here. This source, Dictionary of Biblical Imagery, says this. This is from the entry on the word sea. The cosmic sea, however, also symbolizes the continued threat the forces of chaos pose against God and creation. The sea pushes against the boundaries established for it. Job 38:8, 8 through 11, Jeremiah 5:22. The Bible adapts its neighbor's creation myths of a primeval battle between a creator god and a sea monster of chaos called Leviathan, Rahab, or the dragon, or the serpent. Job 41 is an added reference there. Unlike the myths of neighboring nations, God creates the chaos monster and places it in the sea. Genesis 1, 20 and 21, you have a reference there to the Tanin there. Psalm 104. The monster stirs the cosmic sea but is wounded and subdued by God. Job 26, Psalm 74, Psalm 89, Isaiah 51, we read most of those. And will ultimately be vanquished in the end times. There's your Isaiah 27 reference. As the home of the chaos monster who can be roused, the sea symbolizes the threat of the reemergence of chaos. In fact, the evil world powers and the Antichrist of the last days, which oppose God and his people, are, guess what, symbolized as beasts arising from the sea. It's Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. Again, that is not a coincidence. This is part of how this concept, the concept of the forces of chaos against God's good order, against God's wish that the world would be what it was originally intended to be, would be Edenic, okay? This orderly kingdom of God on earth where God's children, humans, they're part of the family, are happy and productive, okay? All of that gets contrasted in this way. And so it's no coincidence that the great enemy of the end, the great eschatological enemy, would be cast in the same way, a beast that arises from the sea. And the Antichrist is called the beast. All right. Again, these things are deliberate, they're intentional, they are put there in the text, Old or New Testament, by the writer with the presumption that you're going to know what the language means. Okay? Back to the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery. As creator, God controls the sea, both producing and calming its waves, and keeping it within its boundaries. He can dry up the sea at will, Nahum 1:4, or unleash it to judge the world, as in the flood. Thus, the threat of chaos and evil, which the sea symbolizes, is ultimately hollow because it's under God's authority. The parting of the Red Sea and destruction of Pharaoh is a reenactment of the subduing of the sea and the chaos monster, once more demonstrating God's ultimate authority over forces of chaos and evil. The same authority is symbolized by Jesus walking on the sea, and I like to add basically wiping his feet on it, and calming the sea. Even the beast of Revelation, which arises from the sea, is subdued and cast into the lake of fire. And we'll stop there. Well, I one more line because I like this too. The throne room of God contains something like a sea of glass, which may refer to the cosmic sea, Revelation 4:6, Revelation 15:2. But it's like glass, it's calm. Okay, the calmness of the sea symbolizes the absence of evil and the absence of chaos in heaven. For there is no monster of chaos able to disturb it. At the consummation, the cosmic sea is mingled with fire, perhaps a symbol of impending judgment, Revelation 15:2. And after the consummation, there is no more sea, Revelation 21:1. Which symbolizes no more actual or possible threat to the creation and the sovereignty of God. And I would say there's no more threat to the new global Eden. Everything comes full circle. So in light of all that, in light of what I've said, in light of what the DBI says, again, you read Ezekiel 29, the judgment of Pharaoh is a reenactment of the judgment, okay, way back in Moses' day. The conquest of the sea for God's people. And even deeper than that, it's a reenactment, it's a rehearsal of the idea that God is the one who is mightier than the forces of chaos. God will defeat Pharaoh, who is the dragon, who says, the Nile is my own. Well, actually, Pharaoh, it isn't your own. Actually, Pharaoh, it's not you who is in control of it. your nice little ordered world is about to be turned upside down because I view you as a force against me. And I'm going to deal with that force. Again, people in the ancient world would have picked up on the messaging very readily, but for us, it takes a little bit of work.
As we move towards now the core principle of your book, we just talked about it with the theme of chaos and disorder as represented in the biblical character Leviathan. Like we've been going over this for months in my channel. That's why I'm so grateful to have this interview as a capstone, because your book was so influential for me. And the other part that was influential was the Bible Project. They have a really awesome, they just take their time and develop themes through podcasts, probably like 6 months of podcast just to produce a 2-minute video of on themes that get things broken down. So I took their 2-minute video and shortened it down even a little bit more. Let's watch this, and I want to have you respond a little bit more and help us understand how interpreting Behemoth and Leviathan as symbols of cosmic chaos gives us ultimate hope and redemption from God's speech in Job. Let's check this out together.
In the ancient world, many cultures told stories about a monster of death that lurks in the deep, dark sea. In these tales, the dragon and the sea it lives in represent the chaos that threatens to drag creation back into nothingness.
The ancient authors of the Bible not only knew about these symbols, they also used them in stories and poems all over the Bible.
Really? Dragons in the Bible?
Yes. On the first page of the Bible, God brings order by separating the dry land from the chaotic sea, and there he contains the sea dragon. And this monster is connected to that dragon-like snake that confronts Adam and Eve in the garden. A spiritual being using the power of chaos and death to lure humans into their own self-destruction. In fact, entire empires can become like dragons. During Israel's exile in Babylon, the prophet Daniel has a dream about 4 monstrous beasts rising up out of the sea.
Whoa, mutant dragons?
They represent violent kingdoms in league with dark spiritual powers. But then, a new character appears, rising up from the land to sit beside God's throne. And as the dream ends, Daniel sees those monsters destroyed.
So who is this dragon slayer?
Well, Daniel calls him one like a son of man.
The Son of Man. That's what Jesus calls himself.
Jesus resists the dragon in a surprising way. He surrenders his life and willingly enters the belly of the beast.
Wait, the dragon slayer is slain by the dragon?
Well, that's how it seemed. But Jesus trusted in God's power to create new life on the other side of chaos and death. And he called his followers to confront the dragon in the same way.
I forgot I was in an interview just then.
I kind of did too. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I loved it. So before I say anything else, tell me about that clip. Tell me your thoughts on that clip.
I'm just going to agree with it and repeat what it said. Clearly in creation, Genesis 1 is about God organizing matter to create a wonderful, paradisical, lush, vibrant place where human beings can live. And it's about separating. This goes here, and there are these dividing lines. Old Testament wisdom literature strongly associates the physical order in creation and the moral order of creation, that God separates, holy from profane and so on, and you don't mix those or transgress that. But there are powers and principalities in the Bible's vision out there that resist that creational / moral order, that try to blur the boundaries or get people to transgress them. And the sea and monsters are a perfectly appropriate, not literal way to symbolize that. A big, dangerous snake is a great way to symbolize. It's not that snakes are inherently evil, but for human beings, that's a great way to symbolize that. Yeah. If you're an ancient Israelite, like you've got this pretty strong sense of like regular agricultural time and, harvest time. And this is our ancestral plot of land and day and night and just orderliness of creation. And the sea, it's just this churning mass. There are no boundaries. You have no idea what's down there. It's dark. If you're an ancient Israelite, it might as well be bottomless. And every once in a while, some crazy gloopy thing comes out. So it's not that the sea is evil, but it's a perfectly compelling way to symbolize this aspect of God's world.
Yeah, I love that.
So yeah, that's just me agreeing with
Yeah.
the clip you just played.
Well, that's a beautiful agreement. So I wondered if now you could help us trace through that just a little bit to understand in your book, one of the biggest themes that I just took away from was understanding that, like, if we can see Behemoth and Leviathan as these chaos monsters, and the right arm, God's redeeming salvation that's coming through this, how does when God's speaking to Job, when him understanding those two creatures as these chaos and disorder, how does that impact the speech more?
Yeah, in many ways, it makes the speech coherent. It helps us understand why Job worships. It helps us understand how we can trust God when he lets something happen to us, and you're just thinking, if God had, I'm going to say something blasphemous. You see how Christians suffer? And sometimes it's hard not to think, I could run the world so much better than God. Like a 5-year-old could run the world better than God. Like the bizarre things that happen to Christians, and it gives us a way to disassociate, instead of just saying, well, God's just evil. It gives us a way to disassociate God and evil and keep God sovereign over evil and still good.
Yeah.
And ironically, Jason, I think a lot of the book of Job is showing us how seriously God takes us. That God does not put Job through a rinky-dink easy test. And in a way, in the Job speech, he says to Job, if you merely touched him, you'd never forget. It's like God is saying, Job, you thought I just clobbered you for no reason. You've actually been caught up in a war in heaven against an enemy so fierce. If you even saw it, you'd fall to the ground, much less just creep up and go touch. I mean, you'd just be so terrified. And that's your real enemy and mine. I'm not your enemy. That's the enemy over there. Leviathan is still loose, but there's coming a day I'm going to kill him. Now, will you trust me? There's something dignifying about God. There's something frightening and dignifying about God taking us that seriously.
Well, like you said in your quote,
he's not playing with monopoly money in the world. There's really a lot at stake.
Yeah, and Jesus is ultimate proof of that investing, of that real coin there. And it's like you said, though, like when you take the big chunk of what God says there with those 2 chapters, and then you look at Job's response, it makes so much more sense in light of all that for how that shift had taken, the character development that we see happen in that.
In fact, the gospel authors depict Jesus confronting the dragon in many ways, like when he tramples over the stormy sea, or when he resists the tempter in the wilderness, or when he overcomes death and sickness in others. And even when the power of the dragon does its best to entice Jesus,
Jesus doesn't give in.
Jesus resists the dragon in a surprising way. He surrenders his life and willingly enters the belly of the beast.
Wait, the dragon slayer is slain by the dragon?
Well, that's how it seemed. But Jesus trusted in God's power to create new life on the other side of chaos and death. And he called his followers to confront the dragon in the same way.
Which means?
Resist the temptation to use the violent, destructive ways of the dragon. And also, don't be afraid of it. Jesus' victory over the beast has created a way to escape its power. And trust in the power of God, who will one day defeat the dragon once and for all.
If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, share, turn on the alerts for this channel. All those things help us get the message out about what God has done for this world. And we're so excited to have you here along for the journey. This is a community, and I've loved having all the response and all the connection that I've had with you guys across the globe. So thankful you're here. Tune in. Stay tuned, as we always say. The beginning is near. We've got more coming. See you soon.